So far this year, our theme for the whole year as a church has been journeying together. And since the first Sunday in January, New Year's Sunday, we've been journeying with Jesus. So we've been walking through Luke's gospel with him to see what we can learn. And so we come to today's passage. We live in a secular age. That's the reality. And in a secular age, there's always a tendency for people to believe they can manage fine without God. That's the sort of basis that secularism is based on. And then something happens. And it's beyond our power to fix. And we find that maybe we need his help after all. And it's often the case that when that happens, we think we have to somehow prove to God that we deserve his help. By being good, or maybe by doing him a favor, or making a bargain with him. If you just do this, then I'll do that, that sort of thinking. And it'd be easy to get the impression that that's what's happening in today's reading. Because there's a centurion, he needs a favor from Jesus, and he's very deserving. He is very deserving. But I think if we peel back the layers, we find that that's not the case at all. So Jenny's going to read for us from Luke chapter 7, first 10 verses. Let's see what we can learn about the centurion, about his faith, about Jesus, and maybe what the implications of all this are for our lives. Jenny.
When Jesus had finished saying all this in the hearing of the people, he entered Capernaum. There, a centurion's servant, whom his master valued highly, was sick and about to die. The centurion heard of Jesus and sent some elders of the Jews to him, asking him to come and heal his servant. When they came to Jesus, they pleaded earnestly with him. "This man deserves to have you do this because he loves our nation and has built our synagogue." So Jesus went with them. He was not far from the house when the centurion sent friends to say to him, "Lord, don't trouble yourself, for I do not deserve to have you come under my roof. That is why I did not even consider myself worthy to come to you. But say the word, and my servant will be healed. For I myself am a man under authority, with soldiers under me. I tell this one, 'Go,' and he goes, and that one, 'Come,' and he comes. I say to my servant, 'Do this,' and he does it." When Jesus heard this, he was amazed at him, and turning to the crowd following him, he said, "I tell you, I have not found such great faith even in Israel." Then the men who had been sent returned to the house and found the servant well. Thank you for your holy word.
Thanks, Jenny. Shall we pray? Loving Father, please open up our hearts now to your voice. We ask this in Jesus' name. Amen. So, central to this passage is a request for healing. And there's nothing unusual about that, because wherever Jesus went, people were always asking him for healing. What makes it unusual, I think, is the person who's doing the asking. So what do we know about the person doing the asking? Well, we know he's a centurion. An army captain, an officer in the Roman army, possibly seconded to the forces of Herod Antipas, who was the local ruler. We don't know. But he is a centurion. He's a soldier. The next thing that we learn is that he cares about his servant, who is very ill to the point of death. And the NIV version is actually being polite here. The Greek word actually means slave. He's worried about his slave. And we don't have slaves. Well, hopefully we don't have slaves anymore, although there is talk of sort of trafficking and all that sort of stuff. But there it was a legal right for someone to own slaves. And a slave was just your property to dispose of as you wished. But this man cares about him. Now, whether he cares about him because he's an elderly retainer who's been in the family since he was a wee boy, he's very fond of him, or because he just cares about people, we don't know. But he does care. He does care what happens to him. And then the third thing, he's open-minded. As a centurion, he would be a Gentile. And the general rule in those days was that Jews despised Gentiles and Gentiles hated Jews. That was just the way it was. That was the accepted way they related to each other. And yet, it's not the case here. So this man, he hears about Jesus, who is a Jew, and he hears he's a teacher, a healer. He's willing to ask him for his help. And then the final thing we learn about him, just in these few verses, is that he's respectful. He doesn't send along some of his soldiers, go and fetch this healer to my house. He doesn't do that. You'd expect him to do that. He's a centurion. They're in charge. But he doesn't. Rather, he goes to the local Jewish elders and he petitions them to go and petition Jesus on his servant's behalf. There's a lot of respect and thoughtfulness that's present there. And so they go, and it turns out that he really is one of the good guys. He's not a bad centurion. He's one of the good centurions who are few and far between. He loves being in Capernaum. He's got a house there. I imagine being there for a few years. He's very fond of the locals. He's very interested in Judaism, Jewish culture. He loves the nation of Israel, we're told. And he's even paid for them to build their local synagogue. So he's quite well off, but he's quite happy to just be part of the community there. So here's someone who's well off and powerful, humane, open-minded, respectful. And Jesus' response is not surprising. We know Jesus is always ready to help anyone who asks. So he says, okay, let's go and see if we can sort this out. What's really surprising is what happens next. And I get the feeling that when the centurion hears that Jesus is actually coming, has said yes to the request, is coming, that he's suddenly overwhelmed with the idea. Now, maybe he never thought he would come in the first place. I mean, there's that possibility. Maybe it was just a long shot. Well, I'll do anything for this beloved slave of mine. I'll even try asking, but he never actually thought he would come. And so he's quite surprised. Jesus and all his followers coming. Maybe he's aware that if Jesus is a Jewish religious leader, Jewish religious leaders in those days had scruples about going into a Gentile house. Remember, Jews despised Gentiles, Gentiles hated Jews, so going into a Gentile house. So maybe he's just thinking of a polite way of avoiding Jesus the embarrassment. And there's another possibility. It may be he has experienced a genuine, spirit-filled sense of who Jesus is. And genuine humility at the thought of Jesus entering his home. My home is not worthy, he says. So we don't know exactly what the reason is. I mean, those are just my thoughts. We do know that he quickly sends a couple of friends this time, and off they go with the message, there's no need, Jesus, for you to come into my home. And then he explains, he's a soldier, he's under authority. If he's told to do something, he has to do it. And if he tells someone else what to do, they have to do it. And he believes Jesus has the authority. He just needs to say the word, and it will be done. His slave will be healed. And by presenting this message publicly to Jesus, I think he's taking a huge risk. I mean, the first thing he's risking is his reputation. I mean, he's a Roman centurion. I mean, if the people higher up hear that he has actually declared publicly that he doesn't think his centurion's house is worthy of the visit of a local Jew, Well, I mean, I think that's the end of his promotion prospects. I think they're gone. You can't say that to Jews. You're in charge. You've got to show them who's in charge. But he's saying, no, my house is not worthy of you to come in. That's quite a statement to make as a centurion. And the other huge risk he's taking, I think, is what happens if nothing happens? What happens if the slave isn't healed? Then he's a complete fool, isn't he? And I think Jesus realizes this. We're told he turns and he says to the crowd, I've never seen such faith. Never seen such faith. Even in Israel, I've never seen such faith. And maybe for those listening, he's actually laying down a marker for the future that, even Gentiles can have faith. I've never seen such faith. And we're told that when the friends return back at his home, they find the slave is well. He's recovered. A miracle. And throughout the Gospels, you read about people who have these one-off encounters with Jesus, and I often wonder what happens to them next, because we're not told. Did this centurion carry on leading a good life? Oh, well, that's fine. What's next, Or did he become, in some way, a follower of this Jesus? Was he there at Pentecost? Was he part of the first church? When he was transferred to Rome, was he part of the church in Rome? All these thoughts whirl around in my head, but of course we don't know the answer to them. So let's focus on what we have learned. And firstly, I think we've learned something about healing. Jesus once famously said these words. He said, "The thief comes only to steal and kill and destroy. I have come that you may have life and have it to the full." And I think we see this played out throughout his years of ministry, throughout his time on earth. We see this played out. Wherever he goes, he brings life. He brings things like welcome and reconciliation and forgiveness and healing. All these things happen wherever he goes. And, he leaves behind people who encounter him surrounded by this glow of joy and peace, life in all its fullness. And I don't think it's any different today, by the way. I think wherever Jesus is present, wherever people are open to his presence, they discover life in all its fullness. They discover healing and they discover forgiveness, all the things that were symbolized by baby Arthur's baptism. They discover it for themselves. So, what about physical healing? What about healing that is actually miraculous? I mean, if you read the Gospels, you quickly see that there's no one method that Jesus employs. He's not like a doctor with a doctor's manual looking what medicine to prescribe. Healing just seems to happen, and it happens in all sorts of different ways. Come on in. So, for example, on one occasion, we're told he lays hands on someone and they're healed. Another occasion, we're told he does something rather revolting, especially in the post-COVID age. He spits on some clay and mud and makes some clay and smears it over a guy's eyes. He's healed. On another occasion, yes, that's what he'll do is. On another occasion, he just gives a command. He says, "Go off and see the priest." And they're healed. On another occasion, like today, he gives a command and it happens at a distance. So there's no one way in which healing can take place. Healing's not a magical formula, but it is something that can happen when Jesus is near. And and we talk about this at the Alpha course, my own common sense tells me lots of good reasons why there is no need to still believe in physical healing today. There are lots of good common sense reasons why we can just say, oh, well, that doesn't happen anymore. One good common sense reason is the masses of times that we ask for healing and it doesn't happen. And I think we've already probably been there. We're playing in desperation for something to change, someone to be made well, and it doesn't happen. And that's a reality. So there's one good reason. Another reason is, well, we've got modern medicine. I mean, isn't it amazing that you can have something go wrong with you, be whipped in, hopefully, to the infirmary, and within a surgery that lasts 20 minutes, you can come out with 2 or 3 stents in your heart, and you're sent home the next day. Is that not a miracle? So there's the modern medicine argument. Well, so we don't need the miraculous anymore, do we? So we've got the fact that sometimes people aren't healed. There's the fact we've got modern medicine. There's the fact that there's the philosophical question, what is healing? I mean, what is perfect health anyway? You heal your shoulder, you've got a sore tooth. You know, what is perfect health? When you ask for healing, what are you asking for? Will we ever be fully healed in this lifetime? We will in a future life, but will we ever be fully healed in this lifetime? So, as I said, there's lots of common sense reasons why it's possible to say that there's no such thing as physical miracles of healing today. But my actual experience tells me that miracles of healing still take place. That has been my experience. And it may well have been your experience too, where you see miracles happening in all sorts of surprising and wonderful ways. And what that tells me is that, you know, you can't put God in a logical box. It just doesn't work. God is God. You just have to trust him about these things. But there's a sort of deeper question that's there in this passage, and it's one that we alluded to at the beginning. Does God heal the centurion's slave as a reward for all the centurion has done? And that's, you know, underlying that is the question, if we need to ask something of God, do we have to prove to him that we deserve it? Do we have to prove to God that somehow we deserve our prayers to be answered? Personally, I do not believe that it was because the centurion was deserving that his slave was healed that day. I think Jesus cared about his slave. It was as simple as that. I believe it was the centurion's request that opened the door to the healing happening. So the centurion was involved in some way. But it's not who we are that matters, whether we're a slave or a centurion. It doesn't matter what we've done, how deserving we are. What matters, and this is it, okay? This is my message. What matters is our willingness to humbly come before Jesus with empty hands. Because I believe that's what the centurion did that day. He came to Jesus, well, he sent a message to Jesus with empty hands. I'm not worthy, he says. Please help. Please help. And what's true for that centurion is true for us. What Jesus wants is for us to come to him with empty hands. No great magical formula, no great trick, no deserving, no bargaining. Just come. You know, if your hands are empty, he can fill them. It's as simple as that. We need to come before him with empty hands. And when we do that, that's when we discover who God is. That's when we discover he is the God who loves us, who longs to give us good gifts. That's when we discover that whoever we are, his love, he loves us still the same. And my sincerest hope for baby Arthur is that he grows up to discover that in his life. My sincerest hope for all of you is that you are discovering it with each passing day. But